My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 36 years old. The moment I'm about to describe to you happened at 11:22 on a Thursday evening, the 14th of October, in room 412 of the Hotel Saint-Jacques in the 7th arrondissement of Paris, France. I had been sitting in that room for 3 hours and 17 minutes before the door opened. I was in a cream linen chair beside the window, the city below me soft and golden and completely indifferent to what was about to happen, and I had a glass of Bordeaux in my hand, a 2019 Pomerol, $74 a bottle, charged to the same credit card my husband had used to book the room. I thought that was appropriate. I was wearing a navy cashmere dress I had bought that afternoon in the Marais district. My hair was done. My hands were completely still. The leather hotel folder sitting on the round table beside me had been there since 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it contained everything. I had arranged its contents carefully, the way I arrange everything when it truly matters. The elevator in the hallway dinged at 11:21. I heard 2 voices, and then the sound of 2 sets of footsteps slowing near the door. One voice was my husband's. I recognized that slightly too loud laugh he used when he was performing rather than genuinely amused. The laugh that meant he was aware of an audience he wanted to impress. The keycard slotted into the door reader. It clicked. The door swung open. My husband, Elliot Callahan, walked in ahead of her by half a step, and for one suspended second neither of them saw me. The room was dim except for the lamp on the side table and the amber light coming in from the courtyard window below. And I was sitting very still, and I think his eyes simply didn't expect to find me there, and so skipped past me for a fraction of a second before what he was seeing registered completely. Then the color left his face, not gradually. All at once, the way a light goes out when the power fails. The woman behind him. Her name was Petra Hollins. She was 34 years old, and I had been watching her for 14 months. Caught his expression before she caught anything else in the room. And then she turned and found me in the chair, and whatever she had been mid-sentence saying dissolved into absolute nothing. I looked at them both standing in the door frame with their luggage still in their hands. I reached for my wine glass. I took a slow sip. I set it back on the side table with a small, deliberate sound. I said, "I ordered the duck for dinner, but I can call room service again if you're both hungry." Neither of them spoke. What they didn't know was that it no longer mattered what they said. The story was already over. They just hadn't read the last page yet. This is that story. To understand how I came to be sitting in that chair in Paris, you need to understand what our life in Charlotte, North Carolina looked like from the outside, and what it felt like from the inside, because those 2 realities had been diverging for a very long time before I allowed myself to name it clearly. Elliot and I had been married for 9 years. We met at a mutual friend's engagement party in Raleigh in the spring of his 30th year. He was already working in wealth management at a private equity firm called Arden Capital Group on Tryon Street in Charlotte, a mid-sized outfit that managed high-net-worth personal portfolios and maintained the kind of hushed, confident offices that communicated old money without ever announcing it directly. Elliot was handsome in a deliberate way. The kind of man who knew precisely how he appeared in a well-tailored suit and used that awareness as fluently as other people use credentials. He was certain. He moved through rooms as though he had already assessed them and found them satisfactory. At 27, 3 years into a career as a junior designer at an architectural firm in Raleigh, still learning what I was building and who I wanted to be standing next to while I built it, I found that certainty magnetic. He called me the morning after that party at 8:45. He said, "I'd like to take you to dinner on Friday." Not a question, a statement. I said yes. We were married 18 months later in Charleston, South Carolina. A ceremony by the harbor water. 140 guests. A reception that lasted until 1 in the morning. My mother cried. My father shook Elliot's hand for a long time. I wore a dress I had helped design with a local atelier, and walking down the aisle, I felt the way you feel when you genuinely believe that everything ahead of you is open possibility. By the time our first anniversary had passed, I had moved into his house in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte, left my position at the architectural firm, and quietly set aside my professional ambitions in the way that some women do when they are 29 years old and deeply in love and have not yet fully understood what they have handed over. I told myself it was a season, a practical arrangement that would reverse itself when the timing aligned. What I didn't understand then was that once you become invisible to someone, the invisibility tends to compound over time. We had no children. That was not by choice, at least not mine. I won't spend excessive time on this, but I will say that every fertility consultation we attended together, Elliot's response was to redirect the conversation toward his workload, the volatility of the markets, the demands of his travel schedule. The doctors were careful and kind. I left every appointment with a list of next steps that I always followed through on, alone. At home, Elliot never initiated the conversation about what we were doing or why it mattered, or what would happen if it didn't work. I learned slowly and then all at once to pay close attention to what people choose not to speak about. What a person consistently avoids tells you more than what they consistently say. The financial dynamics of our marriage were another thing I came to understand clearly only in retrospect. Elliot managed our joint accounts, reviewed our expenses, and made every investment decision for the household without discussion. I was given what he referred to as a household budget, $4,000 a month for groceries, household supplies, personal expenses. He reviewed it on the first of every month by pulling up the account on his laptop while I sat across from him at the kitchen table. There was a specific month, 3 years into our marriage, when I had spent $300 over the budget because I had replaced a set of dining chairs without asking. He said, "Nora, this is not how we handle money." He said it evenly, quietly. He didn't raise his voice. But I remember looking across that table at the man I was married to and feeling something shift. The particular, clarifying shift of a person who realizes that what looked like partnership had always been, underneath, something else entirely. I didn't say anything that day. I put the receipt in the drawer. I did not replace anything else without asking for almost a year. What I understand now is that even then, some part of me was already storing information, already keeping records, already building the case. The house itself in Dilworth was a 1928 Craftsman, 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, original hardwood floors I had refinished myself over a long summer, and a kitchen that made visitors stop mid-sentence every time they walked into it. I had designed that kitchen from the ground up. I had sourced the fixtures in a showroom in Atlanta, chosen the handmade Spanish tile for the backsplash, specified the quartzite countertops, supervised the cabinetry installation over 11 consecutive days while Elliot was in New York on a portfolio review trip. I had done all of this with the same precision and creative instinct that had made me, at 24, the designer on my team most often asked to lead client-facing presentations. But in our neighborhood, in the social world Elliot curated with the same careful intentionality he brought to his investment portfolios, I was simply his wife, the one who kept things running, the one who knew how to smile at the right moments, the one with a talent for rooms but nothing that could be discussed at a dinner party for more than 2 minutes before the conversation moved on. The social calendar Elliot maintained was precise and purposeful. 4 times a year, we hosted dinner parties, and Elliot compiled the guest lists with the same deliberateness he brought to portfolio allocation. Who was useful, who was ascending, who reflected well on Arctic Capital Group and by extension on him. I cooked every one of those dinners, every single one. I spent 2 days in preparation for each, shopping at the Atherton Mill Farmers Market on Saturday mornings, testing recipes Thursday evenings, plating with the care of someone who understood that every detail of a table tells a story about the person who set it. Our guests would walk into that kitchen and say, "Nora, this is extraordinary. You should open a restaurant." And Elliot would say, "She's gifted, isn't she?" in the warm, proprietary tone of a man displaying something he owned. I learned to smile and accept the compliment and not say what I was actually thinking, which was that I had a design degree and 8 years of professional experience, and I was standing in this kitchen because I had accepted for too long someone else's definition of where I belonged. The patterns I would eventually see with total clarity had been building for years before I gave them a name. I want to give you 3 specific examples because they form a kind of architecture, and when you understand the architecture, you understand why what came later was not impulsive. It was structural. It was the result of careful accumulation. The first happened 5 years ago at a firm dinner at a restaurant called Aria on East Moorhead Street in Charlotte. Elliot introduced me to Jeffrey Callow, his managing partner, a silver-haired man in his late 50s who shook my hand with the reflexive efficiency of a person who shakes hands professionally all day long. Jeffrey said, "And what do you do, Nora?" Before I could open my mouth, Elliot said, "She keeps the house running." He smiled warmly when he said it. His hand went to my lower back. Jeffrey nodded once and turned to speak with someone else. I stood there with my glass of Sauvignon Blanc and a smile that cost me considerably more than it appeared to. In the car on the way home, I said, "I was going to say I do design consulting." Elliot said, "Nobody at that table wanted to hear that. You haven't worked in years." He said it without cruelty, without raising his voice, the way you state a condition of weather. As though my professional life was simply a phase that had concluded, as though it had been a hobby, briefly sustained, now naturally finished. The second moment happened 18 months later, at my mother's birthday dinner in Mooresville, 40 minutes north of Charlotte. My mother, Ruth Ashford, is a retired schoolteacher. My father, James Ashford, is a semi-retired civil engineer. They are quiet people of deep and consistent character, the kind of parents who do not broadcast their feelings but hold them with great fidelity. They had never, not once in 9 years, said a critical word about Elliot in my presence. But my mother had been watching our marriage with the patient, precise attention of someone who has spent 30 years reading people in a classroom and knows the difference between what is shown and what is true. At her birthday dinner that year, Elliot spoke for most of the meal about a portfolio restructure his firm had just closed. $140 million in assets realigned across 4 funds. He used the word "we" 11 times. I counted. When my father asked me, specifically me, how things were going with my life, Elliot answered on my behalf. "She's great," he said. "We just redid the guest room. She's very good at that kind of thing." That kind of thing. As though I had arranged some cushions. My father looked at me across the table. I looked back. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. After dinner, my mother found me alone in the kitchen, filling the kettle, and put her hand over mine on the counter and said, "Sweetheart, are you all right?" I said yes. I said yes, because I had not yet given myself permission to say anything else. But I remember the weight of her hand, and the way she waited for a moment before she accepted my answer, as if she was giving me a second chance to tell the truth. The third moment was the one that permanently changed the direction of everything. 2.5 years before Paris, I finished a design proposal for a boutique hotel group redeveloping 3 historic properties in Asheville, North Carolina. I had spent 3 months on it. A full concept deck with rendered visualizations, material sourcing documentation, a phased pricing model, a project timeline broken into 6-week intervals. It was some of the most rigorous and honest design work I had produced since leaving my firm. And I knew it was good in the way you know things when you have worked without compromise and without the anxiety of someone watching. I showed it to Elliot on a Sunday evening. I had it printed and bound, and I set it on the dinner table beside his plate. He read the first 4 pages. He set it down. He said, "Nora, do you really think you're qualified to take on something like this? You've been out of the field for years. You'd embarrass yourself." Then he picked up his fork and continued eating and did not look up again. I sat with those words for 6 weeks. I allowed his assessment to occupy the space where my certainty had been. The way you allow a cold draft into a room and feel it push out all the warmth before you think to close the door. And then one morning I picked up the proposal from my desk, read it from the first word to the very last, and understood with complete clarity that the only thing wrong with it was the person I had shown it to. That was the moment I stopped asking for permission. That was the moment I started becoming someone Elliot had never thought to watch. I had already, 6 months before that dinner, quietly registered a design consultancy under my maiden name. Nora Ashford Design. I had done it on a Thursday afternoon in January while Elliot was in Atlanta at a conference. I walked into the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds office at 2:15 in the afternoon, paid the $125 filing fee in cash, and walked back out into a gray January afternoon that felt like nothing and was everything. I opened a separate bank account at a credit union on South Boulevard, linked to a separate email address, and began taking small online freelance projects, nothing significant, just rebuilding the muscle, remembering the instincts, reclaiming the professional self I had set down 8 years earlier as though I were only putting it down briefly. I told no one, not Simone Bautista, my closest friend, not my mother, no one. This was mine entirely. And there is a particular quality to something that belongs entirely to you, that no one else has an opinion about, that no one else can diminish with a casual word over dinner. It felt like the first thing in years that was only and completely mine. When I submitted the Asheville hotel proposal through Nora Ashford Design, I drove to Asheville on a Tuesday and told Elliot I was visiting my college friend Dana Morse in Greenville for the day. I sat in a conference room on Battery Park Avenue and presented my full concept to 3 people who had never heard the name Elliot Callahan and had no interest in my domestic arrangements or my marriage or the size of my kitchen. 48 hours later, they offered me the contract. $260,000 across 18 months of work. I signed the paperwork on a Wednesday afternoon at a cafe on Lexington Avenue in Asheville and drove back to Charlotte and made pasta for dinner and watched Elliot talk about a merger he was monitoring, and I said nothing. I sat across from him at the table we had shared for 9 years, and I held the knowledge of what I had just done inside me with absolute stillness, the way you hold something warm when you are standing in the cold. The Asheville project took 18 months and required more of me than anything I had produced professionally in the preceding decade. There were weeks when I was managing 3 active subcontractors, 2 of whom had scheduling conflicts I resolved by phone before 7:30 on Tuesday mornings, while Elliot slept down the hall. There were site visits I explained to him as day trips to see Dana, and he would nod without looking up from his laptop. And I would drive 90 minutes to Asheville and spend 4 hours walking a construction site with a contractor and drive back and have dinner ready by 7. I kept meticulous site logs. I retained every email, every change order, every material receipt. I was building Nora Ashford Design, not merely as a business, but as a proof, not for anyone else, for myself, that the version of me Elliot had described at that dinner table was not accurate, had never been accurate, and that the real version had been there all along, simply waiting for the right conditions. The specific moment I knew the business was genuinely real came in the 5th month of the Asheville project, on a Wednesday afternoon in late October, when the hotel group's project lead, a woman named Sandra Cho, called me and said, "Nora, the ownership group is asking if you'd be interested in designing the bar and lounge renovation as well. They love what you're doing in the lobby." The bar and lounge addition brought $48,000 more on the contract. I said yes. I thanked her. I hung up the phone. I was sitting at my desk in the studio. I could hear Elliot watching television in the room on the other side of the wall. I sat very still for a moment, alone with that $48,000 and everything it meant. And I thought, this is what it sounds like to be seen. Not by him. By the work itself. By the end of those 18 months, I had completed the Asheville project, received written acknowledgement from the hotel group that the lobby redesign had been featured in a regional architecture and design publication's annual issue, and taken 2 additional clients on retainer, a residential developer in Charlotte's South End neighborhood and a restaurant group in Greenville, South Carolina. My gross revenue for that year totaled $387,000. I had retained a financial advisor named Graham Ellery who specialized in personal asset separation, and I had moved my business revenue into properly structured accounts, documented carefully, separated cleanly. By the time I found the credit card statement in August, 14 months before Paris, Nora Ashford Design had delivered 2 completed projects and was midway through a 3rd. I had a design assistant named Blythe, 24 years old, who worked remotely and communicated entirely through the business email account. Elliot had no knowledge of Blythe. He had no knowledge of any of it. He lived in the same house as a woman who was quietly running a functioning multi-client consultancy, and it had simply never occurred to him to wonder what she did with her time. It was a Wednesday afternoon in August when I found the credit card statement. I was sorting through a stack of accumulated mail on Elliot's home office desk. Domestic maintenance, something I had done dozens of times over 9 years without a second thought. Our joint account statements came to the house, as did occasional statements for a corporate travel card that Elliot managed personally and used for firm-related expenses. I was moving the pile to organize it when a single page stopped me completely. A charge of $15,250. Hotel Saint-Jacques, Paris, France. The dates on the charge corresponded precisely to a client summit Elliot had mentioned twice in the preceding weeks. He had said Geneva. He had been specific about it. A hotel near the conference center. Meetings with European portfolio partners. He had even mentioned the weather on the lake. This statement said Paris, the 7th arrondissement, not Geneva, not even the same country. I stood at his desk and looked at that charge for a long moment. I placed the statement back exactly where I had found it. I walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. I sat down at the table. I did not cry. I did not reach for my phone. I sat with the information the way you sit with a structural problem, carefully, from multiple angles, thinking about what it means and what it requires. And I made a decision. I was going to know everything before I moved a single piece. I contacted Patricia Mercer's office 2 weeks later on a Monday morning. Patricia ran a family law practice on East Boulevard in Charlotte and came recommended through a quiet conversation with a friend of a friend who had navigated a difficult divorce 2 years prior. I sat with Patricia for 2 hours. She was direct, precise, and asked questions I hadn't anticipated, which told me she was genuinely skilled. She recommended a private investigator. I hired Roland Vance on the second Thursday of September, paying $3,000 in cash from my personal account for the first month. His first full report arrived on the first Friday of November. He confirmed everything and then more. Petra Hollins, compliance officer at a competing financial services firm in downtown Charlotte. They had met at an industry networking event. The relationship had been ongoing for at least 2 years, with 4 to 5 documented trips per year to cities where Elliot had professional plausibility. The Hotel Saint-Jacques was their established location. Roland had confirmed a prior stay 11 months earlier, booked under a different card. They always requested the same room, room 412. I read that detail and I placed it somewhere quiet inside me, in the part of my mind that was already beginning to design the ending. There was one additional detail in Roland's report that I want to tell you about, because it was the detail that removed any remaining ambiguity from the decision I had already made. Among the documented expenses Elliot had charged to various cards over the 2-year period of the relationship, Roland had identified 7 charges at Charlotte area restaurants totaling $4,860. 3 of those restaurants were places Elliot and I had gone together on what he had described to me as client dinners. On the same evenings, he had told me he was entertaining clients. He had been at a table with Petra Hollins. I had sat at home. I had made dinner for one, eaten it alone, and gone to bed at my usual time. I remember 2 of those evenings specifically. I had saved him a plate of food both times, wrapped it in foil, left it in the oven. He came home and ate it and thanked me and went to bed. I sat with those $4,860 and those 2 plates of food for a long time. And then I put the report in the folder and kept moving. I returned to Patricia's office in November with Roland's full documentation. I took 2 more hours of her time and asked many questions and wrote everything on a yellow legal pad. When we were done, I said, I need 4 months before anything is filed. She asked why. I said, because I want everything in place before he knows the ground has moved. She said, that's a sound approach. She began preparing the petition. During those 4 months, I worked with Graham to ensure that every dollar of Nora Ashford Designs revenue was documented cleanly as separate property. Every invoice, every contract, every wire transfer, every business email, every client deliverable was cataloged chronologically and stored in a secure digital file that both Graham and Patricia could access. My records covered 2.5 years of completely independent professional work, established without contribution from the marital estate, sustained without Elliot's awareness. Graham reviewed them and said, with quiet professional admiration, "These are some of the cleanest records I've seen in this kind of case." I had filed everything the moment it arrived. I had retained every receipt. I had been organized in the way I was organized about everything. And it turned out that in a legal context, the difference between that kind of documentation and the absence of it was very nearly the difference between the outcome I wanted and the outcome I didn't. Meanwhile, nothing in the house changed. I want to be precise about this. Nothing. I was present. I was present. I cooked dinner most evenings. I attended a firm holiday dinner and a charity gala and a client couples dinner in February, where I wore the blue beaded dress Elliot had always admired and smiled at every person in every room with complete composure. At the February gala, Petra Hollins was present. She and Elliot greeted each other with the practiced professional neutrality of people who have rehearsed exactly how to greet each other in this specific context. She came to stand at the cocktail table where I was already standing, champagne in hand, and said, "Nora, it's lovely to see you." I said, "You too, Petra." We stood together for 7 minutes. I know because I counted. I felt nothing that showed. If you're still watching, I want you to do something right now. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever known something was wrong but stayed quiet, not from weakness but because you were thinking? Tell me what you were building while they thought you were simply sitting still. I read every single comment. And if this story is resonating with you, please subscribe because there are more stories waiting and every one of them deserves to be heard. I began preparing Paris in January, 5 months before the 14th of October. It was Patricia who first pointed out that a confrontation documented in a specific location, witnessed by others, would anchor the legal timeline clearly and make the sequence of events irrefutable in any subsequent proceedings. I took that practical guidance and expanded it considerably in my own mind. If this was going to be the end of my marriage, I was going to choose the room it ended in. I was going to choose the chair I was sitting in when he walked through the door. I had spent 9 years being the person who was walked past. I wanted to be, just once, the person already in the room when he arrived. In March, Roland confirmed that Elliot had booked room 412 at the Hotel Saint-Jacques for the week beginning the 14th of October. I waited 5 days. On the 6th day, I called the hotel directly, in French. I had studied French at university and kept it reasonably functional over the years, with periodic practice. I asked for the reservations manager. His name was Christophe. I explained that I was the wife of a guest with an upcoming reservation and that I wished to book the same room beginning the 12th of October, 2 days before his arrival, as I was planning a surprise for my husband. Christophe was gracious and accommodating. He confirmed availability. He took my card details. I did not tell Elliot. I sent Simone a message on the morning of my departure, the 11th of October, that explained in writing, in complete detail, exactly what I was going to do, where and when. She responded with one line, "Call me the moment you're out of that room." Patricia had a full briefing document dated the 11th of October. She filed the divorce petition with the Mecklenburg County Courthouse at 9 o'clock Eastern Time on the 14th. Elliot's office received the papers at 2:12 in the afternoon. His assistant signed for them while Elliot was somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, descending toward Paris. I landed at Charles de Gaulle on the morning of the 12th, at 10:47. I took a taxi to the 7th arrondissement and checked into the Hotel Saint-Jacques before noon. Room 412 was on the top floor, facing a quiet interior courtyard. High ceilings, parquet floors, 2 chairs by the window that looked as though they had been there for decades and understood their own history. I stood at the window for a long time after the porter left, and thought about the fact that Elliot had brought another woman to this room and had felt comfortable enough to charge it to a card whose statements came to our shared household. because it had genuinely never occurred to him that I would look. That was the most truthful thing about our entire marriage. He had not looked at me carefully for years, and so he had concluded, with the lazy confidence of a person who has always been the one watching, that I was not looking at him. He was wrong about that. He had been wrong about that for 14 months. On the morning of the 13th, I walked from the hotel to the Pont de l'Alma and stood at the railing for a long time watching the river. I thought about the 9 years I had given to a version of my life, built around someone else's definition of me. I thought about the woman I had been at 27 in that garden in Raleigh, who had found certainty attractive because she had not yet built enough of her own. I thought about what she would think of the woman standing at this railing now. A woman with a functioning consultancy, a financial advisor, a divorce attorney, a private investigator's report, and a flight home booked for the 17th. I think she would have been surprised. I think she would have been relieved. I walked back to the hotel and had coffee in the courtyard and opened my laptop and reviewed a project scope document for the Savannah Hotel client and sent 3 revision notes to Blythe before 9 in the morning. Then I closed the laptop and went to the Musée d'Orsay. I spent 90 minutes there on the afternoon of the 13th, standing in front of paintings that reminded me of what it felt like to be a person with a future that was hers. I ate dinner at a small bistro on Rue Clairaut, a glass of Beaujolais, a duck confit, a chocolate tart I ordered for myself, and ate without apology. And I felt, for the first time in a very long time, exactly and only like myself. I had a video call with Patricia that evening at 8 o'clock, Paris time. She confirmed that the filings were prepared, that service would occur by mid-afternoon Eastern the following day. I told her the plan for the evening. She said, "Nora, I think you've thought of everything." I said, "I've had 14 months." She smiled. I didn't. I just let the quiet certainty of it settle into the room. On the 14th of October, Elliot's flight landed at Charles de Gaulle at 2:47 in the afternoon, Paris time. Roland sent me a confirmation message at 3:22. By 3:30, I was already in room 412. I arranged the leather hotel folder on the round table by the window. Inside it, 2 sets of documents. The first was Roland's summary, the dates, the cities, the photographs, the full documented timeline going back 2 years. The second was a printed copy of the divorce petition Patricia had filed that morning. I printed both sets at the Hotel Business Center at 2 o'clock precisely. I poured the Bordeaux at 8. I placed myself in the cream linen chair and read a book and watched the light change over the courtyard as Paris shifted from afternoon into evening into the soft, indifferent dark of a city that has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. I put my phone face down at 9 and did not check it again. There was nothing left to manage. Everything that could be done had been done. At 11:22, the keycard clicked and the door opened. He saw me, before she did, by half a second. The color left his face with a speed that was almost biological, the way a person goes pale when something happens that their body processes before their mind does. Petra caught his expression first, and then she turned and found me in the chair, and whatever she had been mid-sentence saying disappeared entirely. They stood in the doorframe with their luggage still in their hands, and for 5 full seconds none of us said a single word. Then I reached for my wine. I took a slow sip. I set a glass down with a small, deliberate sound. I said, "I ordered the duck for dinner, but I can call room service again if you're both hungry." My voice was completely level. Elliot found his voice first. He said, "Nora, how did you?" and stopped, because the question required an answer he didn't have, and I think he already knew that. I said, "Sit down, Elliot." He didn't sit. He stood in the doorframe with his carry-on still in hand, looking at me the way a person looks at something they have no map for. I looked past him at Petra and said, "You can go, whatever you were going to say. I promise you, I've already heard a version of it in my own mind, and you don't need to be in this room for what comes next. The room is charged through the 15th. You can book yourself another one at the front desk." She looked at Elliot. He looked at her. He said nothing, and she left. quickly and with very little sound, and the door clicked shut behind her with the specific finality of a decision that has been made and cannot be unmade. Elliot watched the door for a moment. Then he turned back to me. He said, "Nora, I can explain this." I reached over and opened the leather folder. I slid it across the table toward him. I said, "You don't need to. It's all in there." He crossed the room slowly. He opened the folder. He read the summary page. He looked at the photographs. He saw every date, every hotel name, every city that had been logged and documented over 14 months by a man he had never met, and I had paid with money from an account he didn't know I had. He turned to the second set of documents. He read the cover page of the divorce petition. He looked up. His face was doing several things in rapid succession: shock, then calculation, then something that briefly resembled an attempt at composure, then the particular expression of a man who has discovered that the ground beneath his assumptions was never as solid as he believed. He said, "You had me served today." I said, "Your office received the papers at 2:12 this afternoon Eastern Time. Your assistant signed." He sat down then. He sat in the chair across from mine, facing the courtyard window, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, and the city outside was soft and lit and entirely indifferent to us, and I thought, this is what it feels like to have written the ending yourself. Christoph, the reservations manager, had been perceptive during my earlier communications. When Petra appeared in the lobby alone shortly before midnight, visibly shaken and requesting a separate room, he was professionally attentive and noted the timeline of events with the discretion of someone who has managed complicated situations before and understands the value of quiet accuracy. 2 guests returning to their rooms on the 4th floor had been in the hallway in the moment I sent Petra out. They had paused, registered something unusual, and continued on their way. They were the kind of witnesses that life produces naturally, not staged, not summoned, simply present at the moment the story required them to be. And Simone had my message from the morning of the 12th. Patricia had the briefing document dated the 11th. The petition was filed at 9 that morning in Mecklenburg County. The story existed in documentation before that night had even happened. No contested narrative, no his word against mine. A timeline already written by me in advance. Elliot's responses in the weeks that followed were predictable in their sequence. In Paris that night, before he left the room at nearly 1 in the morning, he said, "I want to work through this." I said, "Patricia Mercer is my attorney of record. Any further communication should go through her." He said, "Nora, don't do this." I said, "I've already done it, Elliot. All of this is already done." I stayed in Paris for 2 more days. I went back to the Musée d'Orsay. I had the duck for dinner the following evening at the same bistro on Rue Claire and ordered the same Beaujolais and sat alone at the same table and felt the same quiet, the same rightness, the same sense of having arrived somewhere I had been building toward for a long time. He flew home the next morning. He called my phone 17 times in the first 3 days after returning to Charlotte. I let them all go to voicemail. His messages shifted from conciliatory to pleading too on the 4th day, a message sent at 9:41 in the evening. "You've been planning this for over a year." "That's manipulative, Nora. I hope you can live with what you've done." I didn't reply. I saved the message for Patricia. She listened to it and said simply, "We'll keep that." He retained Davis Crane, a family law attorney with a reputation for aggression in high-net-worth cases. Davis reviewed what Patricia had assembled and apparently recommended that his client consider settlement discussions. That conversation happened in February. The settlement was finalized in March. His most telling attempt came when he appeared at my parents' house in Mooresville on a Sunday afternoon in December, unannounced, with flowers for my mother. She accepted the flowers and offered him a seat at her kitchen table because that is who Ruth Ashford is. He told her I was destroying the marriage over something that could be worked through. My mother, who has never once raised her voice in a way that was not in service of a classroom full of children, looked at him across her own kitchen table and said, "Elliot, I have been watching Nora for 36 years. If she made this decision, she made it carefully, and I trust her completely. She asked him to leave. He left. She called me immediately. She said, "He came here, sweetheart?" I said, "I'm sorry, Mom." She said, "Don't apologize. Are you all right?" I said, "I am better than I've been in years." She said, "Then I'm not worried." And I thought about the birthday dinner years earlier, her hand over mine on the kitchen counter. The quiet question she had asked, because she already knew the answer, was more complicated than the one I was giving her. I said, "I love you, Mom." She said, "I know, sweetheart. I've always known." Under the settlement, I retained the house in Dilworth. Patricia had documented clearly that the renovation work I had personally designed, managed, and supervised had constituted the majority of the property's appreciated value since purchase. Davis Crane did not contest this point. He also did not contest the financial analysis confirming that Nora Ashford Design was entirely separate property, established independently, developed without contribution from the marital estate, documented with the kind of clarity that leaves no structural argument available. Elliot accepted a great many things in March with the quiet resignation of a man who has discovered that the ground beneath his assumptions was considerably thinner than he had believed. What I understand now, on the other side of all of it, is something I want to say with great care, because I believe it extends well beyond my own story. When I found that credit card statement, I had two choices. I could walk into his office that evening and confront him with what I had found, and he would have produced a denial before I finished speaking. And I would have been caught in the web of his version with nothing solid to hold on to. Or I could get very quiet. I could use the stillness he had spent 9 years reading as passivity, the quality he had always interpreted as my limitation, as the very engine of the outcome. He had spent 9 years looking past me. I spent 14 months looking at every detail of what I was building. That asymmetry was the whole story. That was everything. I want to speak directly to you if you are someone watching this who is in the quiet part right now. If you are the person in the room who has not yet spoken, if you are gathering information in private, rebuilding something in the early mornings and the long afternoons, remembering who you were before someone else's certainty became the frame around your life, I want you to hear this clearly. The quiet is not emptiness. The quiet is where things grow. Patience with a direction is not the same as surrender. Not everyone who says nothing is losing. Some of us are simply waiting until the room is exactly right, the chair is exactly placed, and the folder on the table contains everything that needs to be said. I'm 36 years old. Nora Ashford Design now carries 5 active client relationships and a 6th contract in final negotiation with the boutique hotel group in Savannah whose Jones Street property I began sketching during those 14 months of silence. My gross revenue last year was $492,000. I work out of the studio in the house in Dilworth, the one with my name on the deed now, the kitchen I designed, the wraparound porch where I sit some evenings with a glass of wine and do not perform contentment for anyone. I have dinner with Simone most Thursday evenings. I call my mother every Sunday morning, and I have a cream linen chair from the Hôtel Saint-Jacques in the corner of my living room by the window. I had it shipped back from Paris, because I wanted a reminder not of that night exactly, but of what it felt like to sit in a room I had chosen, with the folder already on the table, waiting with perfect calm for the story to arrive at me. I am not triumphant about any of this. Triumph is loud, and I have no appetite left for noise. What I feel is something closer to clarity, the particular peace of a woman who stopped waiting for someone else to determine what she was worth and decided it herself, quietly, in the early mornings and the long afternoons, in the records she kept and the contracts she signed and the proposals she delivered to people who never once asked whether she was qualified, because the work answered that question on her behalf. I have stopped explaining myself. I have stopped performing smallness so that someone else can feel sufficiently large. I am building things in the open now, and it turns out it is not so different from building in silence. It is just louder. And I have found, to my own quiet surprise, that I don't mind the noise at all. What about you? Have you ever built something in silence while someone nearby assumed there was nothing being built? Tell me about it in the comments. I am listening to every single one of you. And before I go, I want to say something genuine to everyone who stayed with the story from beginning to end. You didn't have to. There are 100 things your attention could have gone to tonight, and you chose to give it here, to Nora's story, and that means something real to us. Revenge Chronicles exists because women's stories deserve the room to be told fully. The slow parts, the silent parts, the parts without a neat triumphant moment but with something better and more lasting, a quiet, accumulated dignity. Every comment you leave, every story you share with someone who needs it, every subscription that tells us you believe these voices deserve a platform, it becomes the reason we keep making them. You are the reason this story got told tonight. You are the reason the next one will be told too. This community is built on the same quiet, consistent showing up that every story here is about. We see it. We feel it. We are grateful for every single one of you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And if you have, come back next week, because the story we have waiting is one I genuinely believe will move you. These women deserve to be heard. You deserve to hear them. Thank you for being here. The loudest comebacks are built in silence, and we are just getting started.